Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you again this week. Happy Friday night in the big town, as they say, as I say now. I guess that's a weird legacy to carry on. Friends, I am so glad to be with you this week. It's been a wild week, but not in politics and government, at least not in Oklahoma, not really. It's been kind of a boring week because we were all stuck at home with the ice and the snow and our kids and our dogs. And I don't know if you're like me, but it was a stressful week, right? A lot of us had kids that were out Friday and Monday for President's Day weekend and in-services and parent-teacher conferences. And then we had 2 or 3 or 4 days of bad weather. And that was a lot. I'm thankful to be back in the Democracy Den today, not recording at home like I did our last episode. So hopefully the audio quality is a bit better. Friends, if you're on Marco Polo, it's an app. I think it's a video app. It's kind of like Vine. You can send videos to each other. I don't know. I'm trying it out. I really only have like 1 or 2 people that I send polos with. But you can look me up. I believe my name is Hello Andy Moore, like it is everywhere else. On that note, let's get down to brass tacks about what is happening this week. Notably, a couple of things happened that aren't directly related to anything going on here, but they're worth a mention. One is that former Oklahoma governor and U.S. Senator and president of OU, David Boren, passed away at the age of, I believe, 83. Talk about a guy who has had a lasting impact on Oklahoma in all kinds of ways, right? His father was in politics. David Boren himself, I think, was elected to the state house at the age of like 26 and then served in some sort of capacity for a long, long time, decades, as governor, as state rep, as governor, as U.S. senator, then as president of OU. And his son, Dan Boren, has also served in elected office. Really a powerful family there. Our condolences with his family. I know, people have made mention of some of the last news stories from Boren's life, and we're not going to get into that now. It was because that's not what we're about. But rest in peace, David Boren, and may we all be inspired by his service to this state for the good things he did, and may we find ways to make even a fraction of the impact that he made on the world around him. On the complete other end of the spectrum, news came out, I believe yesterday, that U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky finally will not seek re-election next year. He is elderly. I mean, pretty elderly. He is 83 right now himself, so I think same age then as David Boren. I don't know if he has the longest tenure in there, but certainly one of the most powerful members of the Senate for decades. He is the longest-serving Senate party leader in U.S. history. Many times. He's been reelected 7 times. Well, elected 7 times. So and each term is 6 years, right? So that's 7 times 6 is 42. That's almost as long as I've been alive. That's literally almost my entire life. That's wild. He's had some, I think, increasingly competitive challengers the last cycle or 2, but man, talk about someone who has ruled with an iron fist. I disagree with Senator McConnell on a great number of issues, but I study him closely from like a political standpoint, arguably a leadership standpoint, although that's a bit of a stretch and according to my definition of leadership. But I think just the way that he has run things there in his caucus and how he has managed the Senate, in some cases, to completely stagnate the federal government from doing anything, from all of Congress, from doing anything. The way he wielded power around the filibuster was revolutionary, and I would argue was the antithesis of how the filibuster was originally envisioned by the framers. Certainly led to the call for them to eliminate it. Of course, they didn't. They haven't. It's still there. They still use it. But really, I think, shifted the way Congress works. And I don't know for the better. Someone who has been... Anyway, we could go we could have a whole other week of podcasts about Mitch McConnell. But anyway, he'll be gone next year. Arguably, he has not been entirely there the last couple of years. His health is really failing. I think we're all familiar with him having senior moments at microphones where he just goes blank and his aides have to like help him away. He is in a wheelchair. He's not the only senator in a wheelchair. There's a photo of him giving a high five to Senator Jim Justice, I believe, the other day as they passed in the tunnel. Senator Justice, under his own power of a motorized little scooter, Mitch McConnell had someone pushing him. I don't think that he's able to navigate on his own. We should really talk about age limits for public office. I know it's not super popular. I'm not trying to be ageist. Obviously, it varies from person to person. I've known people in their 80s that did an excellent job and were very functional up until their 90s. And they were usually the first one to tell you they should not be in public office, right? They're like, hey, I'm doing okay, and I should not be in office. We have age limits on the early end, right? There's a point at which people are too young to be in office. That makes sense. I think we should talk about what age is. I don't know, some kind of test? You got to have a test to drive a car? Ooh, maybe you should have a test to, like, I don't know, steer the U.S. government. That seems reasonable. We really, I think as a country, need to do a better job about addressing cognitive decline and figuring out how we're going to deal with this, because there's going to be a whole bunch of folks aging up. I think it's like 10,000 boomers a day hit 65 and are retiring. And in the next 10, 15 years, listen, everybody that is my age, plus or minus, 5 or 10 years, is going to be dealing with parents who are dealing with cognitive decline. And it is a revolution that's going to hit our country hard, and we got to get ahead of it. But not today. All right. Otherwise, here in the state, Tuesday, the House at least was closed. I don't know if the Senate was, but due to bad weather, they really kind of shut down at the Capitol. Wednesday was, for all intents and purposes, it was Christian Nationalism Day at the Capitol. It was a long session, especially in the Senate, with Senator Dusty Deevers and Shane Jett in committee meetings, hearing a series of bills, everything ranging from trying to put the 10 Commandments back on the state capitol, which has already been ruled as unconstitutional by the state Supreme Court. They had to remove them, and they're down the street in front of another building, a private building. But they're back at it, trying to get them back there at the Capitol. It is bananas to me, the amount of time spent on pushing specific religious issues at our state government. And it is from one religion. I will recognize that there are many religions out there. Only one religion is really pushing any policy about their religion up there. You don't see Hindus trying to get their holy text or anything put in the state capitol. You don't see Muslims. You don't see Jewish folks. You don't see, anything like it's Buddhists. It's really kind of obvious. And to those who would say that we were a Christian nation, I would encourage you to go back and read your history books, read some biographies of our first few presidents, read biographies of the framers of the Constitution. In fact, part of why we formed the United States of America and broke apart from England was due to taxation, yes, and also due to the Church of England, right? Go back and read your history about this stuff. We did not want, and I would argue still should not want, to have state-sponsored religion of any kind, right? Even if you're a Christian and you're like, hey, I like my religion, I think it's pretty good, I think others might be into it as well. Great, fine, that's good. Talk to folks, be an evangelist, be whatever, missionary, do your thing, right? Maybe have some flyers, don't be so pushy, don't murder people in the name of your God. Those are good things, right, that might attract people or at least not push them away. But legislating it is not the way, right? Like that's forcing religious doctrine upon a population that might not agree with you is not the way. A healthy separation of church and state, I think, is definitely the way to keep things, a little more ethical, a little safer. And I know the arguments around this are really bizarre to me. Anyway, we've had other episodes. Go back and listen to episodes. We've had Shannon Fleck on the show once or twice talking about this issue. I am certain we will talk about it more soon. And that reminds me, actually, friends, while we're here, this is an announcement. Something. Hang on. Well, I guess it's an announcement. Here, let me play a sound effect. Well, I'll do it. There we go. An announcement. CivicsCon. CivicsCon is coming April 10th and 11th at Rose State College. You can go to civicscon.com, civicscon.com. For details and to register, it's only $25, right? It's a Thursday, Friday. It's going to be excellent. We are still finalizing details on sessions, but I spoke with Reverend Dr. Shannon Fleck today about, she previously did a session about identifying, like explaining what Christian nationalism is, because it's a term that gets tossed around and everyone's like, yeah. But we don't really, most of us don't really know what it means. And like, particularly, where did it come from? How to identify it? What does it mean? Those who ascribe to it, what's their goal? What are they trying to do? Why should we be afraid? I know everyone is like fear mongering around it, but is it really bad? Like, these are questions that we should ask. And she and some companions will be there to present that in a breakout session. We'll have a lot more. If you care about public policy, elections, anything, right, about civic engagement and just like being a participant in society, we've got something for you. Some stuff will be fun. Some stuff will be serious. Lunches will be included. It's going to be really great. If you came in 2023, you already know it was great. The seats are limited though. The capacity is 130, and so we can't go over that. So we really need folks to buy tickets, sign up. We also need sponsors. So if you are someone who is interested, if you run a business, or you just happen to have some extra scratch in your pocket and you want to help support this, please reach out to me, and we'll see what we can do. We've got a little sponsorship packet we can send you. We would love to celebrate businesses and other organizations who are actively supporting democracy right here in Oklahoma. And honestly, this has a regional draw. We have people that come in from surrounding states because of the caliber of the speakers and the content that we produce. And so we're really excited. We're excited for our host partners. We're excited for, again, a robust partnership with Rose State College. Our keynote speaker will be on Friday at lunch, and it'll be Keith Ellison, who is the Attorney General of Minnesota. We've got to finalize a few details with his team, but we're really stoked about that. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. More news to come about this. I'm going to talk about it every week until we get there, until April. So just go ahead and mark your calendars, and then tune in next week when I have more details about it. I'll slowly trickle announce some of these sessions. How's that? Here's one right now. Oklahomans for the Arts. That's right. They're going to be there talking about why the arts are important, not just because things are pretty and fun, but like, it's not just about entertainment, right? It's about enriching who we are as people. It's about enriching society and how we can and should advocate around the arts. There's like a specific thing, right, that's beneficial there. So there's a great session right there. You should definitely come. civicscon.com. Okay, I think for me, one of the most interesting pieces of news that came out this week, this was on Wednesday, I think, was some polling data, some public polling data from CHS and Associates. That's Cole Hargrave Snodgrass and Associate, the president of which is Pat McFerrin. I don't know if he's been on the show or not. I should invite him. He's a smart dude, and I think one of the best pollsters we have here in Oklahoma. He has they do big polls, all the time, but this one he has done in the past, and it's really like, okay, we're 2 years out from the next gubernatorial election, and we've had a number of big names that have already thrown their hat in the ring. And so McFerrin did some polling about this. So he opens his post on the website with, astute observers know a poll is but a snapshot in time. Too often they're used as a predictor when in reality is they are providing the current state of play and provide data for understanding the current political environs. And the current state of play in Oklahoma reveals that Gittner Drummond currently dominates the landscape and is becoming better defined every day. Dun dun dun. I think we'll kick on some Drummond music for just a minute. We might switch it, and we may need to come up with some additional music, like soundtrack here as we get into this. We don't really deal a whole lot with the with the horse race of some of these electoral races, but because we're so far out, and this is the first poll we have, why not? We'll talk about it because it's been a slow news week. This has been pretty interesting. So, okay, this music is getting to be a bit much. I should have picked something more chill. So Drummond has very high favorables. They've got 6 data points going back to 2018. So 3 in 2018. Of course, that was an election year for him. A couple in 2023, and now this one in February of 2025. And this poll was of 500 registered Republicans. I don't know if these were likely voters or not. But the top line is Drummond has a favorable impression of 49% and only a 13% unfavorable, which is pretty big. 21% have no opinion or do not recall. Was 21% have no opinion, 17% do not recall, which is still a lot. But it shows from going back to June of 2018 that Drummond's unfavorables have remained roughly the same. They went up. The high was 22, and now it's down to 13. But his favorables have steadily increased. It started at 22, and now it's all the way up at 49. Slightly down from a high of 52 a couple of years ago, but that's still honestly pretty impressive in a political climate where most politicians are underwater by quite a bit. So that compares him to some other candidates who have thrown their hat in the ring, notably this week, former Speaker of the House, Charles McCall, who we all expected was going to be running. It's no secret, but he finally announced with kind of a weird announcement, but Drummond is much better known than McCall, and Chip Keating, who's I think Frank Keating's son, maybe, if I remember that correctly, and so beats both of them. And then you've got Ryan Walters, who does rival Drummond in name recognition, but, and this has been like a top line that people have been very interested in, is that Walters has a soft name ID of 81% and a hard name ID of 66%, which is 2 different ways to measure it, but essentially most Republicans know who he is, but only 30%, 3 in 10 Republicans have a favorable impression of Walters. So Walters' favorable is 30% and his unfavorable is 36%. And his favorables have been fairly steady over time, but his unfavorables have come up, right? So now he's basically like a -6. He's 6 points underwater there. He's more unfavorable than favorable. And that's a pretty big gap. In the graphs here, McFerrin breaks it down by everybody, men, women, urban, rural, all that kind of stuff. And in almost every category, Walters is underwater, meaning more unfavorable than favorable. The only one that's close is men, and it's like 30-30. Stack that up against Drummond. In all of those same categories, Drummond is way more favorable. Like all of the unfavorables are 15% or less, and all the favorables are up like around 50%, in some cases like 61%. So that's a pretty big stack. In a 3-way primary race where it's McCall, Drummond, and Keating, Drummond right now beats the pants off the others. In a 4-way primary with McCall, Drummond, Keating, and Walters does get the second most votes, but still Drummond is like right around 42 to 49%. And so should Walters actually run for governor, which is somewhat folks are becoming a bit more skeptic about that now because of this, right? With Drummond in the race, it looks like Walters might not run. And also, if you've noticed, some of their rhetoric has kind of aligned recently, which leads a lot of folks to wonder if Walters might run for like lieutenant governor and let Drummond be the governor. That would be interesting. Possible. We'll see. So if you're into polling and stuff, there's a lot more data in that. You can go to chs.inc.com/2026-gov-contest. It's probably on their like articles page. Yeah. If you Google CHS and Associates and then click on articles, it's the first one. It's pretty interesting. So I'm always someone who's interested in that kind of stuff. McFerrin does post some of the crosstabs, but not a ton. And I don't know if there's a link. I don't think he has a link to like all the crosstabs. No, doesn't. But it's still interesting. What does this mean? Not much, right? Like we're a long way out. And if you think back to 2018, which is when Governor Stitt ran for the first time, when he entered the race, so this far out, so I guess it would have been in early 2017 when they did this, it was a big difference. Back then, Mick Cornett was in the top spot. He had 29%, Todd Lamb had 22%, Gary Richardson had 9%, Dan Fisher at 4%, Kevin Stitt and Gary Jones were both at 1%. Gary Jones was the state auditor at the time and been in the news a bunch. We had some really great episodes of the podcast with him, actually. So in that primary where Cornett came in at 29%, Cornett finished with 29% as well. Lamb bumped up a little bit, finished with 24%. But the real outlier was Kevin Stitt, who started out at 1% and ended up with 24%. And he beat Todd Lamb for second place in the primary, which meant they went to a runoff, right? It was just Mick Cornett and Kevin Stitt. And Stitt beat Cornett in the primary runoff and has now been a two-term governor. So just because someone is very low in this very early polling, do not necessarily count them out, right? I mean, famously, Kevin Stitt hadn't even voted in previous elections before he came in to run for governor. Nobody knew who he was. He came out of nowhere, and then he won. Whereas Mick Cornett was a massively popular mayor here in Oklahoma City, had at first some broad bipartisan support, but of course, due to close primaries, that meant that only Republicans could vote for him, and that meant that he had to pivot his messaging to appeal to those deep Republican voters, and in doing so, abandon a lot of Democratic or left-leaning voters, and certainly a lot of moderates who didn't like the harsh kind of far-right rhetoric. And at the last minute, Cornett tried to pull it back around with that like Bullstit ad where everything was like, that's Bullstit, which a lot of us thought were funny, but a lot of older adults did not, and that's who turns out to vote, especially in those primary runoffs. Cornett lost, Stitt won, and we've had him for all these years. So that's something. You never know what's going to happen, right? This is why horse race politics is like entertaining, but not always fun, right? Like it's interesting from like a data perspective, but don't get invested, right? Just wait. There's a long way to go. Lots can happen, right? Lots can happen this year, next year, and golly, when we see what's happening at the federal level, it'll be very interesting to see how these candidates vie for votes, because they've got to be reading the political winds, right? Reading the tea leaves of what happens. And it's really anybody's guess. I mean, honestly, early this week, I think by Tuesday, some news outlets had totaled up the number of federal employees that have been riffed or let go over the last month, like since Trump was sworn in, and it's up 277,000. It's probably higher by now. I'm sure there's been more this week, probably some today that I haven't seen. So we're getting close to 300,000 jobs lost across the country, and these are good job, federal jobs. Many of them, most, I think, are probationary employees who had been in a job for maybe a year or less, but not all. Some of them had been there for a while. And while a lot of them were told verbally this was about a reduction in force and had nothing to do with their conduct or their performance, the letters that they're receiving say something otherwise, right? And I'm sure you've seen it online. Last week, I had the first person I know, personally, a good friend of mine, lost her job with Health and Human Services. She's a social worker, right? She's like a genuinely good person who deals with, has served the state of Oklahoma for decades and then got a federal job after an accomplished career in Oklahoma and got a federal job really helping children, right? She dealt a lot with adoption, very different, with adoption and home placements, and was let go. And the letter she received said, well, due to your performance, like your employment's no longer needed. And she just had a glowing performance review not 2 weeks prior, right? So this is, while you might look at it and be like, well, clearly, like, they're just sending out letters. Yeah, but when you go apply for a job, sometimes they request a copy of your most recent performance review, right? Or why you were let go from your previous job. And I think now with 300,000 people, like, most employers are going to understand, like, oh, you were part of all those federal employees who got fired for somewhat dubious reasons. But still, like, it's like personally and professionally a bit of an affront. And that's, I think, really, I don't know, sad, gross, all of these things, depressing, hard to digest. And so I think every Friday now we're all getting nervous, right? When we're starting to see the news stories about who else, all the stories of these National Park Service rangers, employees. There's some park where they fired so many people, including the locksmith. And so then they had no one that had keys to get into some of the buildings. They couldn't open the gate to let guests come in. And if this continues, right, there's just going to be more and more and more Americans who are losing their job without really so much as a thank you or a explanation. They are collateral damage in the quest for power by a couple of guys, the president and Elon Musk, it seems like, right? And their acolytes kind of down the chain. And as this continues to roll out over the next weeks, months, years, who's to say, right? It's really hard to know where it's going to stop. They've already had to try to rehire people because they were firing willy-nilly, right? Like all the nuclear scientists, they're like, oh, shit, sorry, we need you back. They couldn't get a hold of them, right? Same thing with some of those parks people. The scientists working on bird flu, which is darn close to an actual pandemic, like it's a really concerning issue. And not only did they a few weeks ago clamp down on the science community's ability to communicate about it, but they also fired a bunch of scientists, and then they're trying to get them back, but didn't really know how to get a hold of them. No, they're all at home pissed at you. And a lot of them might not want to come back. They might love their job, but now they've got this boss way up the chain that seems to have no regard for rule of law or science or public health, these things, right? They've got RFK Jr. was confirmed as head of HHS and has very concerning and illogical beliefs about a lot of the science. He doesn't believe that HIV causes AIDS. He has a few good things, right? Everyone's like, oh, he's good on this one thing. Like I think he wants to ban pharmaceutical companies from doing direct-to-consumer marketing, right? Like the TV commercials you see for Viagra or whatever else, like all that kind of stuff. We're one of only 2 countries that allow it. It's like the U.S. and New Zealand. And he wants to end that. Okay, that's good. But as my grandpa would say, like a broken clock is right twice a day. Just because he's good on a couple of things doesn't mean that he's good on everything by far. There's all kinds of bonkers stuff. Everything. It's just, when you start reading it into positions, you're like, I think it's hard for a lot of us because we want to see the best in people. We want to like hold all of the facts in our hands and like weigh them and be like, well, on the whole, it's pretty close. Or like, maybe it's more good than bad. I don't think that's the case with him. I think it's much worse than it is good. And more importantly, like the distrust that it sows, not just from the policy, but like in the public, giving license for people to be like, oh, well, I'm kind of skeptical of that too. And then you have these like downstream effects. For example, an outbreak of measles in West Texas and New Mexico, right? We had measles completely eradicated in the United States 25 years ago. I think it was into the year 2000 that CDC announced that it was basically eradicated in the United States. We had no community transmission happening. Isolated cases here and there, usually if someone had traveled to some other country where measles was more endemic, but it wasn't a thing in the United States. And now we have more than 1,000 cases every year. We have the largest single measles outbreak since 1964 or whenever the vaccine was created is happening right now in West Texas and in New Mexico. Largely among people who are unvaccinated, but even if you are vaccinated for measles, and most of us had the MMR vaccine, most vaccines aren't 100%. Like you still have about a 1 in 30 chance of contracting it if you're exposed to it. And the fortunate thing is most of us are never exposed. But when it's being transmitted and there's around 60 cases just a few hours away, you start wondering like, well, what happens if one of them like drives here and like they're at Walmart and I'm around them and I didn't know that they had measles, so I was just standing in line behind these kids and their parents, and then you've got community transmission happening. That's what happens. That doesn't have to be how it happens. Okay, so I know this is a lot of like bad news, right? And I didn't set out to have this be a bad news episode, but I actually want to pivot now to what we can do. I don't know about you, but I get messages all the time, almost every day, at least once a day, from people asking me this question. What are we doing? Like, what are we supposed to do? How can we, I think what most people want to know is how can we stop this? And that's a very different question. But I got a message last night from a friend, someone that I've known, at least as an acquaintance, going back to like college, right? Like 20 years. Her message says, WTF are we supposed to do right now? I'm feeling lost and like facts have no place anymore. How can we counter disinformation? Should we place our bets on open primaries? Like, sorry for the burden on you, but WTF do we do? It's bad. And that's right. It is bad. And it feels, like scary and demoralizing and heavy, and it's hard. And I know we've talked in previous episodes about what we can do, what you can do to make it a little bit better. And I'm just going to keep reiterating that. Excuse me. And so some of our friends at an organization called Citizen University posted today on Instagram. And I'm going to share this on our Instagram here in just a little bit as well. So by the time you listen to this, I've probably already shared it on our story, both from Let's Fix This and from my personal account, because I think it's worthwhile. Eric Liu is the name of the man who started Citizen University. He's a great guy. It's a great organization. He has what he calls the 5 Ps. And in fact, his statement says, every day I'm asked by Americans of all backgrounds what they can do and how not to get overwhelmed, how to get involved, where to start. And so he has developed a framework called the 5 Ps. And this is the most succinct, best framework that I've seen about this. So we're just going to go through them. I'm going to read them to you right now. And then you can go online and find them later as well. You could go to their Instagram. It's Citizen University. That's their handle or whatever. The first P is patterns. Read or watch enough news or social media to get a feel for the patterns of what is happening. Then stop and look away. The key in a time like this is not to fall too deep into the details if your work and life do not require you to. And I'll be honest, Scott and I argue about this almost every day, where he's not here to defend himself, so I'll just say it. Like, Scott had to step away from Twitter for a while because it was bad news and it was really bringing him down, which I totally get. I've kind of done the same thing. And now he's back in, right? Like he kind of fell back into it. And so he's sending me news stories and clips. And he was like, man, I know this is bad for mental health, but I can't help it. And he sends me stuff and I'm like, hey man, you can keep sending it to me. I just want you to know I'm not going to respond to it necessarily. I'm not going to read these articles because a lot of this is not real yet. Just because the president says something doesn't mean it's going to happen. It also doesn't, like, he says all kinds of stuff. I watched his press conference last week and he spoke ad nauseum about all kinds of stuff and said lots of things that I thought were concerning, but a lot of it is just him talking, right? Just avoid that. Try not to get bogged down in that. There will be things that affect you, and there are things that you can do something about. Focus on those and let the rest go. But I like how Eric frames this around patterns, right? Because this is really important. We tend to just watch it and it feels like an onslaught from every angle, right? And I think some of us fall into the trap of like trying to look too hard for patterns, right? Like we're not watching Lost and trying to figure out what the numbers mean and who Hurley is and all that stuff. But like you get a feel for the cadence of the news and I think when he says the patterns, he's there's like more kind of top line stuff. I'm like, this is the pattern, right? Like this is kind of what it means overall. So patterns is the first one. Second P is perspective. After you stop and look away, look at something that gives you some perspective. The key in a time like this is to be able to place things in proportion, morally and factually. If everything is a coup, then nothing is a coup. If everything is the end of the republic, then nothing is. And I think that is exactly right. This is the other hard part, is that we too often fall victim into like, the sky is falling, like everything is terrible. But then we lose perspective. Then that's not the case. Because what if something tomorrow is objectively worse? Well, now we've just exhausted all of our outrage yesterday and we don't have anything left for tomorrow, right? So you really have to measure about what's bad. As an easy example, Trump saying he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America doesn't effing matter, right? That is not a coup. Is it like weird? Yeah. Is it dumb? Okay. Like maybe like, does it do anything or hurt your life in any way? No, probably nobody, right? Ooh, Google Maps changed it. Okay. Like when was the last time you even looked at the map where it says Gulf of Mexico? Probably not normally, right? You're not just like scrolling out into the ocean like, oh, look, it still says it, right? Do you know what the body of water between Madagascar and mainland Africa is called? No, you probably don't, right? Could you point to the Strait of Gibraltar on a map? Probably not, right? Like, do you know where the Bering Sea is? Maybe not. Like, there's lots of things out there that just don't matter, right? So don't waste your outrage energy, right? Don't waste your concern on stuff like that. Like each of us are a battery with a certain amount of energy in us at any given time. Don't waste it where it's not needed. Put stuff into perspective, right? Like, are they going into schools and rounding up children who are undocumented and then going to their houses and shipping off their family? Okay, that's, at least in Oklahoma, that's not happening, not yet. But if that happens, like, that's a BFD. Like, that's a big freaking deal. And you should be upset about that and find ways to act around that. Lord willing, that doesn't happen. But I'm just, as an example, like, that's a bigger deal than what a map says, right? Right. The third P is people. So after you've got some perspective, then go be with people in real life. Touch grass, as the kids say. Touch your friends. You know what I mean. See them, read their faces, do things together. Mix your activities between some with people you already know and some where you meet new people. The key in a time like this is not to be alone and is to keep exercising the muscles of association and joining. I said this, I think last week or week before last, like, our resilience is in our resistance, or our resistance is in our resilience. And like the only thing worse than going through this is going through this alone. As an example, tomorrow night, we're hanging out with friends. And there's like another couple, family with friends, and then some single adults that are all part of our friend group. And we're going to get together and have tacos. And like, listen, money's tight for everybody. We're just doing Taco Bell. And we're going to get together and like let our kids play. And we're going to hang out for a few hours just to commune with each other, because we don't do it. And our actual purpose in that gathering is to use the time together to brainstorm how we can do something monthly where it like rotates between people's houses or something, and that we can bring in more people. So it's like our core group, but we also want to find a way to bring in new people. And that was before I even read what Eric wrote here. But I think that's a super strong thing. Here at Let's Fix This, I spent a lot of time today looking through the calendar through now and the end of the year, trying to plan out like how we can do just social gatherings for the sake of getting people together, right? You know, not everything has to be an outrage rally, but there is value in convening and coming together. So that's the third P is people. The fourth P is place. Being with others and participating in collective activities is about the face-to-face interaction. But what it is really about is place. We need to pay attention with the places we live, work, play, worship, and join with others. The key in a time like this is to remember that the soul of America exists only to the extent that there is a living, vibrant soul of Fresno, a soul of Muskogee, a soul of Missoula, a soul of Tallahassee, right? I like that he threw in an Oklahoma town, in Muskogee. That's right. There is a soul in your town. Whether you are in Oklahoma City or Tulsa or Bethany or Ponca City or Wilburton or Hera or Gotebo, Tahlequah, Veneta, Enid, Woodward, Guyman, Beaver, wherever you are, like your town has a soul. If you feel lost, if your soul feels squishy and lost in its size, think about your neighborhood. Something else I'm strategizing around is how to get more connected to our neighborhood. Like there's a Facebook group, we're in it. We just learned there's like a neighborhood board or something. It seems like, okay, well, both my wife and I are like, we should be more involved. How can we do this? How can we like do things where neighbors get to know each other? And then my dream is to connect our neighborhood with the neighborhood we used to live in, which is only like a mile away, and do some like inter-neighborhood hangout stuff, right? So if anyone from Cleveland is listening, I know who you are. You're on the board over there. Listen, Gatewood, we want to do something. Maybe it's a softball game, kickball. I don't know. Maybe it's a barbecue. I don't know. Like, let's find a way to like get these neighborhoods connected. Not because it's like an economic district, although that's fine, but like, how can we like just get neighborhood communities to come together and like let our kids ride bikes in the street together, right? Like and hang out. I will happily stand around, eat a hot dog, and drink a beer with anybody, right? Like, let's get to know each other and hang out. Because when we do that, now we've got people, we've got place, it's giving us perspective, all right? And then the last P is power. Learn about civic power. Learn about why the Constitution separated powers and starts with a premise of government about limited enumerated powers. Learn about how citizens have used forms of power beyond law to change society. Then practice power yourself. If you're listening to this podcast, you are a limited number of Oklahomans who care enough about what's happening in our state and maybe our country to spend some time out of your week to listen to a podcast about Oklahoma politics and government. There's a pretty finite number of listeners, right? Like I could do a podcast about true crime and murder stuff and probably get a lot larger audience, but you are my people, right? Many of you went like me from being politically curious to now politically concerned and maybe even actively engaged, right? You probably vote often. You pay attention to how things work. You might even be aware of some of these patterns, right? You're already 1P into this 5P strategy or framework. You know stuff about how our government works that your friends probably don't. And if you don't feel like you have all the answers, that's okay. Why? Because you got the whole world at your fingertips, right? Hop on Wikipedia. Start reading about how the Constitution was made, why they did it the way they did. There's an excellent podcast series called Constitutional that like walks through the Constitutional Convention, right? In like 1789 or whatever it is, where they're like writing it out. And it's fascinating. I listened to it while remodeling a kitchen one time, and I really came away with a decent looking kitchen and a much greater appreciation for the nuances of the U.S. Constitution. If that doesn't tell you a lot about what kind of person I am, but it's really good. It's a public radio podcast. It's excellent. Civic power is where it at. And I think when Eric says civic power, what he means is people power, right? You, me, us, we, together. Like we can do this. We can do this in a few ways. We can get through this together. Like we will get through this together. I'm here with you. Let's hold hands. I love a good hug, right? We can cry together. We can go out in a field and scream, whatever you want to do. Like, holler at me. Let's do it. I'm here for you, and I'm going to trust that you're here for me as well, right? But it can't just exist on this podcast. It can't just exist my voice in your ears, right? It has to be participatory. It has to be you showing up and not just like waiting for someone. If everyone waits for someone to schedule something, right? If you're waiting for Let's Fix This to create an event for you to go to, I'll tell you what, like I'm one person. We have a limited budget. So if you want to donate some money so I can do this not just part-time, but like full-time or hire somebody, we can do more things. But also for free, you could schedule something, right? I know it's cold right now because it's February, but think about May when it's warm. Do you want to have a cookout at your house? Do you want to invite your friends? Do you want to have a Constitution cookout, right? I will come to your house. I will be dressed as I'm Just a Bill from Schoolhouse Rock, if you would like. We can I can't eat while I'm in the costume, but I'll come dressed as it nonetheless. And let's have a cookout and talk about the Constitution and why it is the way it is. Both the federal and the state Constitution. There's a lot of similarities there. And there's some important differences. But we should know about these documents because there's a lot of folks who will cite the Constitution as the reason we do things, and they are currently trying to twist that logic around, right? They're trying to make the case so that judges and justices can rule in a way that has never been ruled before, right? They are currently trying to reinterpret the Constitution in a way that has never been interpreted in 248 years, 49 years. And if that doesn't give you at least pause, if not grave concern, then you should go read the Constitution again. It's not that long, right? It's not a book. It's just like a long paper. It's like 3 pages. You can read it. And the Bill of Rights, like this is the Constitution. It is a remarkable document. And I know it's hokey to say, but it is remarkable in its nuance, in its openness, its flexibility, and its rigidity. Like there's a lot that they put in there and a lot that they didn't, and there's a reason for that. There's a lot of stuff they didn't anticipate. They didn't anticipate the internet or AI or social media, right? They didn't have any idea of that. But they definitely did have an understanding of power-hungry autocrats trying to take over a country, right? That's not new. It blows me away when you have a president of these United States quoting Napoleon, right? When you have him trying to gaslight the whole country and another country, saying that Ukraine started the war with Russia. Like, that's not new. This is stuff that our founding fathers 100% anticipated and wrote a constitution for this reason. Oh, people are trying to indoctrinate people with religious beliefs that are tied to their citizenship. Yeah, they definitely saw that and wrote the Constitution to prevent that. Like, this stuff is not new. And if we sit idly by being like, well, why don't these people understand? Well, we have to do the work ourselves. And that means we have to bring our friends and neighbors along with us. So I'm all in for constitutional cookouts. Hit me up. podcast@letsfixthis.org. You better get on my calendar soon because I'm going to start scheduling these too. And I don't want to be overbooked. Right? There's probably a limit to how many hot dogs I can eat in a year. Let's find out. All right. So those are the 5 Ps. According to Citizen University, he has a whole framework thing and some advice for approaching these things. You should go to their Instagram and comment 5 Ps, and they will send you a DM with that information. I just did it myself. So far, I'm one of 3 people who have commented on there, and they posted this 4 hours ago. We need more. I'm going to do it. I'm going to share it far and wide. I encourage you to as well. Let's put our heads together and find a way to make a difference. All right, friends. That brings us to the end of this week's episode. As always, decisions are made by those who show up. We just talked about how you can show up. I love you. I trust you. We're in this together. Decisions are made by those who show up. Have a good weekend.